Hello, this is the weekly Backdrop developer meeting. It's December 1st, 2022, and we've got a group of people here to discuss some Backdrop development priorities. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm Quick Sketch on the internet, core committer and technical lead for the Backdrop project, and calling in from Oakland, California. We'll do some introductions of everybody present. We'll go around. We'll start with Jen, and then we'll go to Tim.
Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California, where it is cold and slightly less rainy than it was an hour ago. That's it for me today.
Thanks, Tim, and then Martin.
Sure. Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim, in Deerwood, Minnesota, where it is. Hey, an hour ago it was cold and sunny. Now it's cold and cloudy. Sorry, it's changed. That's all. Talk to you later. Whoever's next.
Thanks, Martin, and then Justin. Sorry, Martin.
Martin Price in Northeast England, United Kingdom, and it's cold and cloudy here.
Justin, and then Luke.
Yeah, Justin Christopherson in Denver, Colorado. Just help out with infrastructure here and there.
And is it cold and rainy where you are?
No, it's sunny. It's Colorado. It's always sunny.
Yeah, it's sunny and warm today.
Nice.
Define warm.
I think it's in the 50s.
Oh, that's warm. Yeah.
60s. It's 61 now, yeah. I haven't seen the sun in a while, but I heard it's nice.
All right, Luke.
Luke McCormick, cellular occasionally in various places in San Ramon, California, which is not far from Oakland. So we have the same weather here, which is in the 50s and 60s, and we call that cold. All done.
Okay. Yeah, thanks and welcome, everyone. Jen, there's some exciting news in the contrib space. Do you want to do some announcements?
Yes. So apparently in the last week, we exceeded 1,000 modules in the contrib space on GitHub. And Martin, who's here today, added our 1,000th project. So thank you, Martin, for putting that in. Yeah, I had no idea that we were that close. So thank you all for keeping an eye on it and pushing it over the line. That's really exciting. Of recent projects that we've added, we have a couple of new ones with official releases, and that includes book menus, switch, editor image dimension sync, paragraphs, jQuery UI accordion 2. And those all came out in the last 2 weeks because we missed last week's meeting. So let's go back to the 18th, I think.
Is this the first paragraphs is in there? Is that the first stable release of paragraphs or what?
Oh no, this is
Yeah.
paragraphs, jQuery UI accordion 2.
Oh,
so
I
it's
see.
just
That's all
yeah.
one module name.
Yeah, it is basically a fork from there was an original module called Paragraphs jQuery UI Accordion 2, but it didn't do quite what I wanted, so I did a fork and in my opinion made it better.
Nice.
Excellent. Okay, fantastic. Let's see, as far as scheduling and things that are happening in release land, we coordinated a scheduled release for tomorrow. Backdrop 123.1 will be releasing tomorrow, and I know that we said that we were going to have it out a couple times in the previous meetings, but now it's on the schedule. It's going to happen tomorrow. There's a huge swath of fixes. Let me see. The milestone for 123 has 26 closed issues in it currently. So it'll be great to get all of those items out there. We do still, I mean, there's no like gatekeeping on the timeline. So if there's items that you'd like to get in before tomorrow, then get reviewing. There are a couple of RTBC issues as well, and we'll try to get those in before the release. So, all right, topics for today. There we have a forum post under forum.backdropcms.org under the events section where we solicit topics for these meetings. There weren't any topics submitted for this meeting, but we have a couple that were added by the people present here. And the first one is question or issue 2954. All info hooks should support a file key. Jen, looks like you started this several years ago. Do you want to summarize the idea here and the direction that you want to see this take?
Sure. Sorry about my typing. I will try and mute. So yeah, this is something that I noticed in Backdrop Core. There are a lot of info hooks that do support a file key that allow you to define your specific functions in a different file and only include that file when it's needed. And there are a couple of modules that implement hook info and define their own type of include files that you can add, like token.inc and stuff like that. And it's a little bit magical. Like, you really have to know the system to know about those specific instances like token that allow that, but there's no clear like line in an info file that will point you towards that file being available. And there's a couple of places where I would love to be able to put code for specific functions together in a separate file. But in order to do that, you have to sort of add your own include line at the top of your module file in order to make sure that it gets included. And I thought we might be able to improve the developer experience around these included files a little bit by having sort of a standard of if you have an info hook, the info hook can have a file key, and that file key can include a file, your functions in another file, or if you leave it out, they can be in the module file. So maintainers can still continue to manage things the way they do now. But if you wanted to sort of organize your own code a little in a cleaner way, you could do that. I think I also went through core and I found a couple of the modules that are in core handling this in different ways. Like, some of them have a fields.inc function or file, and some of them don't. And that probably came from these modules being like in contrib first, and the various different contrib solutions that we came up for this to solve this in Drupal 7. And so I created this issue because I was like, hey, is this a good idea? And Opie commented right away and found a list of all of the hooks in core where we might want to include something like that. And I went through each of them and sort of sorted them into hooks where I think it might be beneficial to have an info key, new ones being field, entity, block, layout, and filter. And then there were a couple that are already using hook info, and I would recommend that we either continue doing that or add that ability. So that could be for entities like taxonomy, user, node, comment, files, menu I also threw in there. And then there were a couple of other ones where I wasn't sure there was a benefit of including the stuff in a separate file, but it would be nice to, if we had a standard, they could have it or not. And that would be CK editor, config, and forms. So I would love it if anyone who's either working on core or contrib modules and wondering how, like, should we try and organize these files better, or is there a benefit to doing that, could have a look at this and see if it would make sense to add this in. I ran across this again recently. I was working on another contrib module and I was like, oh, I really wish I could put this in a whatever file and it would be included through my info hook. And I was like, wait, I opened an issue for this years ago and found it and dug it up. So I figured I'd just bring it up and see what people thought of it. So I don't know, Nate, if you have a core developer perspective on it already or not, but just a thought process for me.
Yeah, some more clarification. So there's hook info, already that lets you put stuff like token and views into an include file. But the issue also describes something, an info key, or
Yes.
using something in the info file. What is this?
Sorry, like a file key. So like in a hook menu, right, you have the ability to add a file key and point a specific file where all of the stuff for that menu entry is loaded. And so if every info hook or every type of I don't know, some pattern allowed for a file key that would automatically include that file, then we could adopt this pattern anywhere we had a bunch of stuff that only needed to be included in a specific scenario. I was also thinking that could benefit a little bit in like the amount of actively used code. In some places we have a bunch of stuff that's just dumped into the module file because we know it'll be loaded there, and if we could move it off into a separate file, we wouldn't need to load that file unless we were using the thing. Something like filters, for example, like if you're not using that filter, you don't need to load all that code.
Yeah, I see. Blocks another good example. Yeah, anything that uses callbacks, right? The callback has to be in the module file right now, or in an include file that you've included up at the top. I see what you're saying
Yeah.
there. One option, and I'm not sure if this would be a substitute for that entirely, is that something like blocks, for example. Blocks, you have hook. I hate the way blocks work. Hook block form and hook block submit or whatever, and those actually they don't actually take callbacks. It's just the name of your module. It's like hooks that then have a switch statement or an if statement in it. It's like if delta is this, then show this form. If delta is that, then show a different form. And what we did for blocks to improve them, instead of saying a file and then listing your callbacks in a file, hook block info now as an alternative takes a class key, and then classes are auto-loaded via hook autoload info. So that makes it so that every individual block has its own standalone file that is a class.
I like that too. And so I also like how with a block you can do either, right? They can either load a file or load a class. I would love to see that option here as well.
Yeah. And so some of these like filters are a really good example. Filters should probably be a class as well instead of a collection of callbacks. Really anywhere in core where we have callback 1 is this, callback 2 is that, callback 3 is this, and those are just arbitrary function names. It would really be ideal if those things became a class that grouped those things together.
Can we do that like block where we have a like filter legacy class that calls the hooks? Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Yep. And then everything, for filters especially, things work as before. Yeah, I think that I'd kind of prefer to go that way on most of these ones where where we, instead of adding a file key to an info hook. But I don't know, there's probably some that we can't so easily convert into classes.
What I think also like for contrib, right? Like if we came up with a standard, like I think in core, we should definitely convert everything to classes where it would make more sense to have them be classes. But for contrib, it would be nice to have the option for people to just organize the code that's already there. So if you could say like, oh, I just want to put all my fields in this field file and then just define it. So my recommendation would still be to add both keys, the classes key or the class key and the info key, and then implement both. And that would also sort of give us the ability to make any changes we needed to make in core incrementally. So like we wanted to move the filters first into another file and then convert that file into the class file. I don't know if there's benefit doing that, but at least would give us the option.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a little bit of a potential conflict that file and class would be mutually exclusive. And I think that in the case of views used to actually have a file key that now it just gets ignored because the class name gets auto-loaded. And so there's a lot of legacy code out there that still specifies file for whatever and points at the class, but that doesn't do anything whatsoever because you still need to specify it in hook autoload info.
What about So if we implemented it in a way that was like if class was defined, use class, otherwise if file is defined, load file, and that way we would sort of have established like this is what we want long term. We want it to work this way, so this is going to be what's going to get priority. But then if you have legacy code and it's using the other method, that would work too.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is that if you're reorganizing your code, it would be nice if you jumped all the way to like the final like best solution and not reorganizing it using the middle solution.
That's how stuff doesn't get updated.
Yeah, I mean that's also true. But I don't know when the only benefit you're really making is so that you move stuff out of a module file and into a .inc file. I don't know. It's not.
So it's a developer experience issue and a possible performance improvement.
Yeah, but it's making a new DX issue that you're introducing a key that gets ignored sometimes, right? And so you have to then document this thing works one way sometimes and works a different way if you specify this other key. So yeah. Well, anyway, there's other things in here too. The hook info portion of things, where we could just make hook info for a bunch of modules and make it so you could put comment specific hook, file specific hook, menu specific hook, all of that stuff into separate .inc files.
That might have to wait till Backdrop 2. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy because what it would do is modules that started using these and started putting their hooks into separate .inc files would only work with certain versions of Backdrop 1. Like it would, you know, only works with Backdrop 124 and forward, you know,
Yeah.
because they used one of these hooks. Yeah, I don't think that that's totally a limiting factor. Yeah, so yeah, I don't think it needs to wait for 2. I think that's what I'm saying. There's lots of things that, you know, only work with a certain version of Backdrop because a certain thing was introduced at a certain point.
Okay. And in general, you're on the fence as to whether you think this would be a helpful improvement or not. That's what it sounds like.
Well, I might be on the fence, but I'm not the, you know, I'm not the only person in this.
Yeah, I know. I was just trying to get your feeling on it because I was really excited about it, but maybe I shouldn't be quite so excited.
Yeah, the hook info stuff might be useful.
I feel like that is useful mostly for like a developer like consistency thing, so you don't have to figure out like which hooks use op.
Yeah.
And I
yeah,
think Drupal 8 did that.
Yeah, the the one caveat there is, and this is might be a personal thing, I don't know. I never really liked hook info because of the way that it functions. That every time a hook is invoked, it has to first call hook info to like loop through all of the modules to see if these file exists, if the file exists. So it adds a lot of file exist calls, but then that whole list gets cached, so it's not awful. But at the same time, it's, you know, depending on the number of modules you have, it and times the number of hook info implementations, it's checking to see number of modules times number of hook implementations, file exist calls. So, you know, you have 100 modules. Right now, there's maybe a dozen hook infos. You know, so that's over 1,000 file exist calls. And if we add 10 more, then that's 2,000 file exist. Or wait, no, if we had 10 more, that would be 10,000 file exist calls.
So maybe that should be a separate issue then, to like, because it sounds like that we found a problem, but it's a developer experience problem, and there's a lot of things that could be done to improve the developer experience specifically around this problem. But that one might be something where we would need to measure like performance implications of the hook info cache rebuild versus the execution of a page with less code because of the like there that could be something where it might actually be slower after we do it than before. So maybe worth measuring.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, but the thing that I am like totally gung ho about is like let's use more classes for things instead of callbacks, because the callbacks is where the problem is that the callbacks don't have files that are associated with them, and that's where the file equals whatever would be beneficial. But we already have the class autoloader that would solve that problem, and the real thing is that just callback groups of callbacks that are all like loosely associated with each other is just kind of messy. So there's two reasons why I would want to go down that route, but yeah, it's not something that we can just apply a pattern to and just say, yeah, do this, do this, do this. It's going to take like, for filters, hey, introduce classes. For field of even saying it out loud, fields, fields could potentially be
Yeah, I mean
classes with
everything in this list,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Filters, fields, files, menus.
Yep. But as is the case with blocks, I think it's been demonstrated that when modules come over from 777 and even in core, most blocks are still using the hook implementation because that's what had been there. And it takes a fair bit of effort to convert those into the class forms. Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry to rain on your parade.
That's okay. I'm still excited about it. I'm just not, maybe like it isn't the next thing on my list. So
Okay. Let's see. We've got issue 647 on here, field group and core revival. Is
yeah,
there
so we talked
activity happening there?
talked about this in the last meeting. I'm not sure if it was on the recording or afterwards, but I have a slow-ish month in December, and so I was thinking about working on that again. There's a couple of technical comments on there that I need to rebase the pull request and address those. But if I remember correctly, this got stalled last time in needing people to review it, and so I was just gonna throw that out here again. If I get that into a code review needs testing state, I would love it if we could get someone else to test it. No one here has to commit to doing that right now. I just figured if it was on the meeting, we might be more likely to get help in that department. So that's all.
Okay. There's a big long thing in here. Is this?
So this was from last week's forum post, and we
Okay.
didn't have a meeting last Thursday. So sorry, it was Martinson. He had to drop off. But it was something that I thought might be really relevant because this is one of the major API changes in PHP 8 is the way it evaluates conditions. So in Drupal, there's a lot of places where we say like if variable and then do a bunch of other stuff. And in PHP 7, that might evaluate differently than how that evaluates in PHP 8. And so this was around truthy evaluations, and do we have best practices for that? So I thought it's relevant now that PHP 7 is end of life. Maybe we should talk about the best practices for handling truthy falsy conditions.
Here, I'm going to share this the agenda document so that we can get the whole description here. Okay, I can't find anything in the docs about whether truthy falsy should be used or whether control blocks should only ever use conditions that will be explicitly true or false. I think it would be useful to understand acceptable and unacceptable uses of truthy falsy. I personally find code is less clear with truthy falsy conditions and prefer explicit true false conditions, but I would be interested in understanding what the best practice is. Is this example below? Do you think it's the same topic?
Yes.
Okay, I found a few in contrib where truthy falsy conditions have failed when looking for an array key. So, this is the, I see. So this is the condition, and then, yeah, then use that. When this key didn't exist, it caused an undefined error. Replacing it with this fixed the issue and prevented the error when a key didn't exist. Yeah.
And I think that Drupal, based on the amount of contrib code I've seen, is guilty of this a lot. Like there's a lot of code in contrib that uses this not explicitly true or false comparison, like a variable is an integer, and they'll say if variable to determine if the value's been set or not. Or even if it's not an integer, even if it's a string, like they'll use if to see if it's an empty string rather than to see like if it has a value. So yeah, I wish Martin was still here, but it seems like something that we should improve our documentation around, especially now that PHP 8 is potentially going to evaluate those conditions differently than PHP 7 did.
Yeah. So, yeah, this particular example, this first one, this doesn't make any sense, honestly. Like it doesn't really seem like it. Oh, I see. Unless it needed to convert something like a null value to a string. But what I'd really like to see in most cases is putting an is set around something is a quick fix for when you don't know if that thing's going to be defined or not. But in truth, I think the real best practice is making sure that the value exists before you check its state. And so ideally, like this theme info array would have been populated with some kind of defaults. And so you would have been able to say like you know, something like this where you say plus equals array, and you know, and maybe there would Google Docs isn't the best for
Place to write
writing
code.
code samples, but yeah, all of your defaults would then have other key, you know, false. All of your all of your keys would have some kind of value in them, and so then you would eliminate all of this like ternary operator at the time where you're using the value. Instead, the value would always be there. And that's what we strive to do in various places. Like a lot of hooks have, you know, default options and default values. Like when you specify a views handler, it has an options definition callback that specifies the defaults. You want to have something that populates the defaults all the time. And sometimes we don't have those things, and the ideal solution would be to add something that populates those defaults.
I think we're like sort of a step better off with our configuration system always having defaults now, whereas in Drupal the variable get with returning the default value I think was sometimes abused, where sometimes the default value would be false if you wanted to then follow that with a condition where you were testing it, and then some in other places it would actually be a default value where you were using it before you needed to actually use the value. And I think that we're already not going to be in that scenario anymore. So hopefully it's just slightly less likely than Drupal 7, but I don't know. It is something that concerned me when I was looking at the API changes between PHP 7 and PHP 8, and I saw that change and I was like, oh my gosh, we use that everywhere at Drupal. So
yeah, there's also like we're in an in-between state where newer versions of PHP, I think it's PHP 7 and higher, have a better ternary operator. I'm going to share my screen again for one more time. So instead of doing this example, PHP 7 can now do this, and it shortens it up a lot. And that says it's the same thing. It acts as though is set is around it. It doesn't throw a warning, and then if the value is set, then it returns the first value. Otherwise, it returns the second value. But because we still support PHP 5.6, which doesn't have the short form ternary syntax, we're kind of in this space where we have to use this more verbose syntax to support both, from PHP 5.6 all the way up to PHP 8.1/2.
So when Backdrop 2 comes out, it'll be 2025. We'll be on PHP 10.
I don't know.
I think so PHP 8 will be end of life by then. So maybe PHP 9. I don't know. I was just thinking about like when should we consider dropping support for PHP 5.6? I think there's a core issue about that already. It's hard to do while we might have people still running on it, or people who are running Drupal 7 on that hoping to move to Backdrop, and maybe they need to do that on the same server for some reason. But I think maybe for Backdrop 2, we should reevaluate and see how we can help, because I feel like there's a lot of nice benefits to being on secure versions of PHP. New features like this too.
Well, I mean, that's what telemetry is that's the objective there, is that we see the percentage of sites that are running versions of PHP that, we can move on from. What we did with, we only recently dropped support for PHP 5.3 and 5.4. And that was, made on a decision based on nobody is supporting those versions of PHP at all, like not even operating systems with long life cycles at this point. So we basically just waited it out until it wasn't relevant anymore. Kind of same thing that happened with Internet Explorer, right? It's like we just we were talking about removing Internet Explorer support a long time ago, but we never did, and then eventually it just lasted so long that now it's completely a moot point. There's no Internet Explorer that you need to worry about anymore. And so now it's like not even an argument anymore. And I'm not sure that that's the best policy, but at the same time, it's been really safe for us that we just wait so long with our backwards compatibility policies until the point that it's just no longer even a question as to whether or not it's going to impact sites or not, because it's no longer relevant.
Yeah, I have a feeling by Backdrop 2, PHP 5.6 will probably be in that category.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely. I think, yeah, PHP 5.6 will probably become irrelevant in like 2 years. Like completely, it'll be unheard of to have a PHP 5-based site.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Yeah, we don't have any other topics for today, and we're kind of out of time anyway. So big reminder again, tomorrow is going to be the 123.1 release. And we have, the next 24 hours to get things put together. I think that the timing of the release is going to be 1 p.m. Pacific. And that's only just when we're going to be getting started. If we haven't already, we'll file an issue, as we always do, for tracking the creation of the new release.
So it'll happen after 1 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, not at 1 p.m. Pacific. Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned it in this meeting. I am going to try and focus on doing some infrastructure stuff next week, working on issues in the backdrop.org and forum issue queues. And I'll probably post a blog post this weekend about what my plans are in case anybody wants to join with me next week and help with that. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining the meeting, and thanks everybody out there that watches these. So take care. We'll see you next week.